Hi, I'm Rob, N1NUG, and today on the bench I've got the Ailunce HS4 by Retevis that they sent me to review. I've got to get the disclaimer out of the way up front. Now, this is a 10-meter ham radio, but it's really designed and based on a CB radio architecture, and as such, it's very easily converted over to CB radio operation. That being said, I think most everyone here in the US knows that this is not a legal radio to operate on CB. It puts out too much power and it covers frequencies that it's not supposed to. Now in this video, I'm going to be covering and treating this as a ham radio and using it only on 10 meters. One last thing I want to mention before we dig in and take a close look at this radio is that I'm not trying to sell you anything here. Now, if you are interested in the radio and want to learn more or maybe purchase one, I will, of course, have an affiliate link below, but to be perfectly blunt, I really don't care if you buy one or not. I agreed to do this review video because I'm genuinely curious for myself how this radio works, and I kind of enjoy the process of sharing that experience with you. Having said that, let's take a closer look at this thing. When you purchase one of these radios, you of course get the radio itself, but you also get some accessories. First is a fused and socketed power cord, and I believe this to be 16 gauge wire. We get a bag of accessories including a mic clip, mounting hardware, and even some protective stickers to protect the sides of the radio when you put the mounting bracket on. And speaking of mounting brackets, the one that comes with this radio has no paint or finish on it of any kind, but it is made of metal, and it is one of those tilting kind of 3-position brackets. Interestingly enough, we also get a USB cable with this radio. So I'm going to check this out later and see what we can do with that in terms of connecting it up to a computer and see if there's some kind of programming or rig control software that we might be able to use. Now the user manual is fairly well written and covers everything that you need to know about how to use this radio, but it's fairly brief. There's not a lot of words in here. And of course, the radio comes with a standard Retevis mic with up and down keys and an AQ button on the front. And it has a 4-pin circular type connector that screws into the side of the radio over here. Starting with the back of the radio, we've got a pretty decent sized heatsink over here. We've got an SO239 jack here in the middle. We've got a jack for a CW key here and an external speaker jack over here. And in between them, we've got the USB mini style connector. And then of course down below is the standard 3-pin CB radio power jack. Now one thing you may have noticed is over here on this corner, the radio cover is kind of damaged a little bit, but I don't think it was damaged in shipping. The box that it came in was fully intact. I think this may have happened during manufacturing or maybe during packing when they put it in the box. Either way, it doesn't seem to be affecting the operation of the radio in any way. According to the sticker on the top of the radio here, it complies with Part 15 of the FCC rules, which is what most electronic devices need to comply with. It also states that all radio review videos require that any screen protectors that come shipped on radios need to be peeled off on camera. All the controls that you would need to use most often on this radio are knobs and switches, all here on the front panel. But you can see over here we've got volume and squelch, we've got an echo control, we've got RF gain and RF power controls right here, we've got a band button. Now if you're not familiar with the 1970s export CB radios, this kind of flows down from that architecture of radio design, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later in the video. Over here we've got the mode switch, and you can see this radio is capable of CW, AM, FM, upper and lower sideband. Just a quick interruption to the video here. I was editing things and realized that for the next sections of the video where I talk about tuning, I kept mistakenly saying the word megahertz when I meant to say kilohertz. Even after I realized what I was doing while I was recording, I still kept saying megahertz. So anywhere you hear me say megahertz, I meant to say kilohertz. Sorry about that. Next to the mode switch, we've got a clarifier. Now this is not a continuous knob, it has sort of detents. And as I turn it, you can see that it controls one of the frequency registers and that is settable. And then over here on the right, we've got a channel readout and a channel selector. And again, on a ham radio, you don't really need something like that, especially on a 10-meter radio. But because this is CB architecture, this is what we've got to work with. Now by default, the channel control changes the frequency in 5 megahertz increments, and we can use the clarifier to tune in 1 megahertz or less increments. Now up here in the top left, we've got some buttons for commonly used features. Anything labeled on top of the button toggles on and off when you push the button. Anything listed below the button toggles on and off when you first hit the function key and then push the button. Long pressing the function key will let us get into the radio's menu system. And the radio's display is sort of a reverse LCD screen. And what that means is that the field of the display is blacked out by the liquid crystal material, and the numbers are kind of voids in the liquid crystal material. The orange color gives good contrast and is pretty visible from most angles and even in bright light. I know I already briefly talked about the tuning controls on this radio, but I want to go through that again in a little more detail because for those of us used to sort of ham radios, it gets a little bit weird. Now I've already mentioned that the big knob, the channel control, changes the frequency in 5 megahertz increments. Now the clarifier, as I have it set now, changes the frequency in 1 megahertz increments. However, I can change that by pushing in on the control. And you can see I can advance which register I want to change by continuing to push on the control and watching the number blink. When I get to the register I want to change, I just stop pushing the button for a second or two, and then the clarifier will act on that register. And again, if I want to change that, I just push in on it until I get to the register I want to change. Now to back up a step, I had mentioned that the channel control changes the frequency in 5 megahertz increments. But I kind of lied about that, or maybe wasn't fully clear. Now you can see when I change the control, it jumps from 15 now to 23 and then to 25. What it's actually doing, every time you change the clarifier, it's sort of memorizing the frequency that you had that correlates to the channel number that's displayed here. So this thing really is sort of changing the channel, and the clarifier is setting the frequency of the channel. So now when I change the channel control and advance to a channel where I've set the frequency to something other than that 5 megahertz step, it's going to remember that. Now again, that can be a little confusing to those of us that are used to using ham radios with sort of traditional VFO controls. But once you've used this for a few minutes, you kind of get used to it and realize what's going on. We also need to consider this switch, the band switch. And the reason for that is because the radio actually tunes within 300 megahertz segments. So if we set this down to band A and turn the channel control down to channel 1, you can see we're at 28 megahertz even. If I change this down to channel 60, you can see we're at 28.295. If I want to tune anything higher than that, I need to go to band B. And then when we go to channel 1 on band B, it starts at 28,300 and advances up to 28,600, or 595 actually. So that's why I said in the beginning of the video that tuning this radio is a bit clunky, especially for those of us used to ham radios with traditional VFOs. But as I also said earlier in the video, it makes the radio less likely to be put on the wrong frequency when you're driving. We have all this tactile feedback with all these knobs and controls, so you can tune these things and almost count the clicks to get where you need to get and not take your eyes off the road while driving. It also means that you're less likely to bump one of the controls on the radio by accident and change the frequency. So aside from the tuning controls, we also have a RF power level. This is for transmit power, and we've got an RF gain control in the middle. And of course we've got volume and squelch. And those controls work like any control that you'd find on pretty much any other radio. Now in between those two is the echo control, and this is something that you'd almost never use on ham radio, I don't think. I can't imagine this being of any use for sort of regular DX or weak signal contacts, but maybe you'd use it to enhance the presence or sound of your audio if you were rag chewing with your buddies. You turn it on at a low level and you might get a little bit more bass out of your audio, I guess. But having said that, this is probably not a feature that I'll use. Now, I'm not going to cover every single feature that's controlled by these buttons, but I will point out a few that I think are useful. Now, by default, the radio comes with the key beep enabled. Anytime you use the channel control or push one of these buttons, the radio is going to beep at you. Now, aside from the beeping noise, you can tell it's on because there's a BP icon lit up on the screen. In order to turn it off, you just push the function key and then the RB BP button, and now you can see the BP icon is gone and the key beep is off. Now, the primary function of this button is to turn on and off the transmit Roger beep. And again, that's more of a CB thing than it is a ham radio thing. Even on CB, I don't think these are used very often, so 99% of the time I think you'll have it off. But if for some reason you accidentally push the button and turn it on, you'll see an RB icon lit up here. Now, something that you may use, especially if you're using the radio mobile, is the noise blanker and automatic noise limiter. Now, I don't have a lot of noise in the shack right now, but you can see by the icon up here, the function is turned on. If I turn it off, you may have noticed that the background noise came up a little bit in level and intensity. Most of the time, I just leave that on. In case there is any noise, it does a pretty good job of filtering things out. The next button enables a dual watch function where you can kind of monitor back and forth between two frequencies. That's not something I'd normally use, but the secondary function on this button is something that I might use, and that would be to turn off the LCD screen. That may be useful if you're using this thing at night in a car and you don't want that bright LCD screen in your face. You can quickly turn it off, or you can turn it back on again. This radio does have scan capabilities, but I typically don't use those, especially on a ham radio, so I'm just going to skip over to this button, which enables a 10 kilohertz tuning jump. And you can see when I push it, the radio jumps by 10 kilohertz. And if I push it again, it jumps back to where it was. This next button toggles the meter between power output and SWR measurement. Now, for this demonstration, I've got a dummy load hooked up to my tuner so that we're not actually transmitting over the air. But if I key up, you can see right now the SWR is a perfect match. And that's indicated because the meter is only showing one segment. But now if I reach over and just adjust my tuner a little bit, you can see that the meter goes all the way up to the maximum. And I've found that according to my tuner, the SWR meter will show maximum when the tuner is measuring an SWR of 2:1. If I adjust the meter so that the SWR is somewhere less than 2, you can see that the meter on the radio goes down accordingly. And then if I turn the feature off, you can see when I key up, we get the power output measurement. And right now we're on AM if you hadn't noticed it before. Now, the last feature that I'll show you in the buttons here is the one that turns off the SRF meter. You can see when I enable that, it's just gone from the screen. Even when I key up, it's not there. So if for some reason you don't want to see the SRF meter, you can turn it off. And if you want to turn it on, you can do that as well. Next, I want to show you some of the features and functions that are in the menu system of this radio. I'm not going to cover everything because we'd be here all day if I did, but I will show you the ones that I think are most useful. If there's anything that I missed here that you want to see, let me know in the comments and I'll make a separate video about it. One more quick thing before we dig into the menu system. I mentioned earlier in the video that everything you needed to know was in this manual. And that wasn't completely true. We'll talk about that a little later in the video. But one thing that is in here is the secret decoder table for all the menu abbreviations that are in the radio. They're a bit cryptic, so when you're going through this, unless you've got them memorized, you're probably going to want to look in here to see which one does what. To get into the radio's menu system, we may have already looked at this, but we push and hold the function key. The first menu item is mic gain, and this is probably the one you'll use the most often, which is probably why it's a good thing that the radio always goes to this spot when you go into the menu. Anyway, you can see that by default it was set to 41, and you can crank it up as high as 63. I found it works pretty good cranked up to the max, so that's usually where I leave it. Now to keep going through the menu items, I just keep pushing the function key. The next couple of options deal with the Vox setting. I don't normally use that, so I'm going to skip over those. This menu item, RCDT and TCDT, this is for setting the receive and transmit CTCSS tones, and I'll cover all that in a separate video if you want to see it, but for now I'm going to skip over it. This next feature is labeled as a noise compander. You can see by default it's off. If I turn it on, you can hear the background noise kind of reduces a little bit. The next option is for the transmit noise gate. I'm going to skip that for now. Now the next one is what I'll call a regular digital noise reduction circuit.
Calling CQ, calling CQ. This is Papa Tango 2, Zulu X-ray radio calling. Calling CQ, calling CQ. This is Papa Tango 2, Zulu X-ray radio calling.
So I found a signal there, and you could hear that noise reduction did a pretty good job at reducing the background noise without making the subject signal sound too digital or watery. Now, one thing to mention about this noise reduction circuit is that it seems mutually exclusive with that other NC feature. In other words, if the NC feature is turned on, this is turned off, and vice versa. This next setting allows us to change the microphone type between dynamic and electric condenser. Now, the microphone that comes with the radio is an electric condenser, so that's where it'll be set by default. But if you've got an older microphone that you want to use, you can switch this over to dynamic. This setting labeled N09 is your transmit monitor, so we could set that level up pretty high here. Now I've connected up a dummy load, and now we should be able to test this really quick. Hello, test. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I guess this feature can be useful if you want to test your transmit audio, but I just typically use a second radio to do that. As I mentioned earlier, this radio does have CW, and as such you can set the CW side tone with this setting. This next setting, BEU, is labeled as a voice prompt volume. Not exactly sure what that means. I've kind of played around with it and haven't figured out what it does. This next setting allows us to change the step of the clarifier, but as we've already seen here in the video, it's just a little bit easier to just press in on the clarifier button and set that directly by this method. But you can access it through the menu if you want to. This next feature allows us to change the action of the clarifier. By default, it's set so that the clarifier will change the receive and transmit frequency as indicated by the RT icon. If you want to just change the transmit frequency, you can set it to T. If you want to just change the receive frequency, you set it to FIN, which I guess stands for fine tuning. I'm going to leave mine on RT so it changes the transmit and receive frequency together. This next option controls what happens when we push in on the clarifier knob. Now by default it's set to STP or step, and you already saw that behavior. If I change this to T or COA, it causes the clarifier to tune in coarser steps. My personal preference is to just leave this on step mode. The next option turns on and off the auto squelch. Now by default that's off and the squelch works like a normal squelch control, but if you want to use auto squelch, you just turn it on here. The next option sets the length of the timeout timer in seconds. You can see there that's 180 seconds, and turning the channel control lets us set the value to as much as 6 minutes, turn it completely off, or as little as 30 seconds. The next function sets the scan type. If we leave it in 5.9 mode, that means the radio will scan until it senses a signal. It'll stop on that signal and then resume scanning once the signal is gone. If I set this to T1, the scan will still stop when it sees a signal, but it'll resume scanning after a few seconds instead of waiting for the signal to disappear. The next function turns on and off the transmit SWR protection. If the radio senses an SWR higher than a certain threshold, it will prevent the radio from transmitting. Now by default this is on, and that's probably a good idea. If you're using a tuner like I am with this radio, you may need to turn this feature off. When it's on, If the SWR is too high, you won't have enough transmit time in order to dial in the tuner the way that you need to. The next menu option turns on and off the voltage protection. When the feature is on, the radio will actually give a warning if it detects the power supply voltage is either too high or too low for safe operation. Now, it's probably normally a good idea to keep that on, but you can turn it off if you want to. It's not listed in the manual, but the last menu function is the AGC setting, and it can be changed between fast, FA, or slow, SL. This radio sure does have a lot of features. Now, if there's anything I missed that you want to see, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll make another video to show that. But for now, let's check the transmit power. I've got my Diamond SX100 meter in line with a dummy load on the back. I've got the power setting to 300 watts, and we are in forward mode. And I will set this to PEP mode for now. Since we've got the meter in 300 watt mode, we're going to be looking at the second scale from the bottom. I don't have a key hooked up, and it looks like in CW mode, pushing the PTT button doesn't activate the transmitter. So we'll start off in AM mode. And just as a point of reference, I've got the RF power control turned all the way up. So in AM, when I key up with no modulation, we can see that carrier power is right around 10, maybe 11 watts. If I talk directly into the mic, you can see that we're swinging up to 40, maybe almost 50 watts on those voice peaks. If I switch over to FM, you can see that carrier power looks like it's right around 50 watts. And of course, when I talk into the microphone, that's not going to change because of the nature of FM. And now if we go over to sideband and I talk directly into the mic, you can see that we're peaking around 50 watts on those high voice peaks. So I've actually brought in a key. This is actually a paddle, I guess, but it'll allow us to check CW power. So if I key up, you should be able to see we're putting out 10 watts carrier power. The next thing I want to do is a transmit test so you can hear what this radio sounds like over the air. We're going to leave everything set up over here with the radio connected up to the meter and the dummy load, but over on the other side of the room I'm going to connect up my SDR Play software-defined receiver so that we can receive the transmitted signal and record it, and then I'll play it back in the video so you can hear what things sound like. And if you happen to know what movie the following quotes come from, let me know in the comments below.
Let's test the Retevis HS4 in AM mode. Once you understand the linkage between observation and reality, then you begin to dance with invisibility. The Retevis HS4 in AM mode. Now we'll test the Retevis HS4 in FM. Mother Earth, you are my support system. As a soldier, I must drink your blue water, live inside your red clay, and eat your green skin. Retevis HS4 FM test. Now let's test the Retevis HS4 in upper sideband. If you couldn't unalive your adversaries or keep them imprisoned forever, there was surely only one option left in the Colonel Alexander cannon. You change their minds. Retevis HS4 upper sideband test.
As I briefly mentioned early in the video, the radio comes with a USB cable so that we can connect it up to a computer. I've gone onto the Retevis website and I've found some programming software that we can download and try out. I'll leave a link to that down in the video description. Now, I think there are a few things that we can only do in the software that are not available from the controls and menus on the radio itself. So if you're looking for some of those advanced features, most notably split or repeater operation, you're going to want to check out the software. Downloading and installing the software is pretty straightforward. As I mentioned earlier, there will be a link in the video description if you want to check it out. After I got my software installed, I grabbed the cable that came with the radio and I plugged it into the radio and then plugged it into the USB port on my computer. Now, the first time I plugged it in, Windows searched for and found a driver for the cable. Once that all happened, I was able to communicate with the radio. Now, in order to set up communication with the radio, I've got to go under Setup and choose Communication Port. Now in my case, the COM port is 5, so I'm going to say OK. And then I can go under Program and choose the Read from Radio option. This will take a few seconds and it'll read all the data from the radio. Once it's finished, you can see we get a message telling us that the read data is completed. Over on the left-hand side of the software, you can see there is a tree with some options. Now the first one is channel information, and that pops up the window that we see here. First up top, we can see that the frequency band is set to 28 to 29.7, which is the US 10-meter amateur band. Now what we're seeing in the field of this window are the 60 channels that are available in band A. And this selector up here correlates to the band selector on the front of the radio. And you can see we've got the same options, A through F. And you can see that under band A, channel 1 is set to 28 megahertz by default. And if we scroll down to channel 60, you can see this is set to 29.295. If I switch over to band B, you can see that we're spanning from 28.3 all the way up to 28.595. Now for each band, we can also choose an emergency channel, or maybe more accurately in the ham world, a calling channel. And then by default, you can see that it's set to channel 9, but you can set it to any of the available channels. So now if we look at the body of the window, you can see that these are all the various things that we can set for each channel. We can set the receive frequency, transmit frequency. We can set a busy lockout, which is kind of an interesting feature that you wouldn't normally find on a ham radio like this, but it's here. We can enable or disable the echo, and I guess by default it's enabled, but I assume that the front panel control overrides this. We can see that the high cut filter is disabled by default. The 10 kilohertz step is also disabled by default, but the noise blanker and ANL is enabled. Roger beep is of course disabled for everything. And the scan column has all of these channels available in the scan list. If you wanted to skip it, you could just click delete, and that channel would not be included in any scans that you were doing. And then the last two columns deal with the CTCSS or DCS tones, and you can see that the first one is for decode or receive tone, and then the last column is for encode or the transmit tone. And this is the one that you would choose if you wanted to use a repeater. Now speaking of repeaters, this radio is capable of repeater or split mode. And what that means is that you can have a different transmit and receive frequency. Now, I haven't found a way to program that on the front panel, but you can do it here on the software. And in fact, let's give it a try and see if we can make it work. Now, there's only a handful of 10-meter repeaters here in New England, and only one that I think I even have a chance at hitting, and even that's kind of slim. But let's program it in anyway. The receive frequency is going to be 29.640 megahertz. Now, the standard repeater offset for a 10-meter repeater is minus 100 kilohertz from the receive frequency. So let's enter that in now. 29.540 megahertz. I'm going to leave all the rest of this stuff at the default, including the decode or receive CTCSS tone. And I'm only going to choose a transmit tone. Now the repeater that I'm going to try and access, which is in Bristol, Connecticut, has a tone of 88.5 hertz. So I'm going to select that. There is no way to set the mode in the software. So I'll have to make sure that when I actually try this out on the radio, that I've got the switch set to FM mode. To send all this to the radio, I just go under the program pull down and choose Write to Radio. Click OK, and we'll let it go into the radio. So it looks like that completed successfully. Before we go back over to the radio and try this out, I want to show you that we can also set some of the common features on the radio by opening the Options and Features window. These are pretty much all the options that you would find in the radio's menu system. You can easily access them here in the software, and they have plain text English descriptions as to what they are. So this is probably an easier way to kind of set those things than trying to do it through the radio with all those cryptic 3-character abbreviations that are in there. So we fired up on channel 1 of bank A. That's the one we just programmed the repeater frequency into. And I've set the radio to FM. Now I do have an antenna connected up, so let's see if we can hear this repeater. I'm going to turn the squelch down just in case it's real low. I'm going to key it up and try and see if I can get into it now. N1 NUG testing. So it doesn't look like I'm able to key up the repeater, but hopefully you noticed that when I was transmitting, the frequency changed, and we also had a little TSQ icon that lit up down here to let us know the tone encoder was active. If I was a little bit closer to this repeater or maybe had a better antenna, we'd probably be able to access it. Band conditions on 10 meters for the last couple of weeks have been excellent. So I took advantage of that and made some contacts on this radio. I was able to make DX contacts on AM, FM, and sideband. Now, I didn't try CW because I've lost everything I forgot when I learned it back in 2003. One of these days, maybe when work calms down a little bit, I've got a little bit more brain space, I'll relearn CW and become a code operator again. But for right now, we're just going to stick to voice contacts. Now, the antenna that I've got this radio hooked up to is a Mako V58 CB antenna. I've had it for almost 20 years now, and it actually works pretty well from 20 meters all the way up to 10 meters. But having said that, I do need to use it with a tuner because it's cut for 11 meters. So as I tune around and make contacts, especially when I go up into the AM and FM portions of the band, I'll be using the tuner to kind of touch things up and make sure that we've got a good match between the radio and the antenna. Okay, I copied San Antonio. I got somebody else came in and stepped on you a little bit, but we got you in the log here. When you're in the clear, you're about 5.5 here into Connecticut.
Yeah, Roger. Nice to hear you out of Connecticut. Not real strong here. You're about the same. Yeah, nice to work you, and we'll catch you down the log. Have fun chasing the DX out there. N1 NUG K5 RWD 73 Chow. All the best.
Okay, my friend. November 1, November Uniform Golf from Equal 5 Charlie Victor Zulu. Your signal report is at 57 in Canary Island. Go ahead.
Okay, QSL, thank you for the 5-7 Canary Island. You're 5-7 Connecticut.
Roger, Roger. Thank you. 73, 5/7 in the island of La Palma, Canary Island. See you later. Good luck.
Yeah, QSL, who's that?
Yeah, I just heard you saying QRT, but I did hear you. Just wanted to give you a quick shout saying you're making it fine into the UK, Roger. It's Mike 3 Echo Uniform Foxtrot.
Okay, no problem. November 1, November United Germany. Okay, no problem, Bob. You are 5 and 9 at the moment, 59 at the moment, no problem. Thank you very much for the QSO Mini DX. Have any tweet?
Okay, 73, thank you for the contact. Good luck, N1 NUG.
Thank you, bye-bye. Florida 4, Germany, Yankee Jam. How's that?
Okay, I'll go to that time. November 1, November Uniform Golf. This is Victor Kilo 3 Echo Yankee. You're 4x4, my friend. 4 and 4. 44. Name here is wrong. Romeo Oscar Bravo. Southeast of Australia. Yourself? Yeah, 73. Hope we can catch you in better conditions next time. All the best from Australia. November 1, November Uniform Golf. This is Victor Kilo 3 Echo Yankee. 73 from Australia. Bye-bye.
This is an interesting little radio. And if you're in the market for a single band 10-meter radio, this may be one that you want to consider. If you want to learn more, I will of course have an affiliate link in the video description below, but don't feel obligated to use it. I hope you enjoyed today's video. 7-3, and thanks for watching.